Thank you for joining today's webinar on the creation of SAF and other liquid renewable fuels like renewable methanol. My name is Paul Green, and I lead a biogas R&G advisory business and curate the Biogas.tv video channel. I hold these free monthly webinars on new topics on new biogas-related technologies in the spirit of education. Today's webinar is brought to you by Plain-ET Biogas, a global leader in providing biogas plants. Plain-ET has built over 850 digester projects worldwide and are confident in the deployment of dozens of different feedstocks, including separated food waste, ag manures, food processing residuals, ag residuals, and waste sludges. When considering a partner for building an anaerobic digester for your biogas fuel plant, please give Plain-ET a call at planet-biogas.com. The slides from these presentations are on my website, and you'll get an email later today giving you that link to download the presentations if you'd like. A video recording of these presentations will be on Biogas.tv in about a week. The biogas industry is no stranger to change. A decade or two ago, the industry was all in on making electricity from biogas. Of late, RNG has been the default end energy product from our projects. Going forward into the future, industries like aviation and global shipping are looking to decarbonize. Waste to energy through anaerobic digestion and biogas is a great way to help them accomplish their carbon reduction goals. Let's talk about creating SAF and other liquid fuels. Today, I'm so pleased to bring you three of the nation's premier next-generation technology providers and innovators: Aether Fuels, Envolon, and Circularity Fuels. First up is Aether Fuels. I now introduce Claudio Bertelli. Claudio is responsible for business development at Aether Fuels. He spent over 20 years at Honeywell UOP, where he had several positions with global responsibilities in sales and business management for UOP petrochemicals and renewable fuels portfolio, leading the commercialization of breakthrough technologies from there. He led business development at LanzaTech, a carbon recycling technology leader, sustainable fuels and chemicals. Claudio has his MS in chemical engineering while in Italy and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. So Claudio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the participants to this webinar today. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce Aether Fuels and our Aurora technology to produce SAF. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of the mission and the challenge that we want to tackle at Aether Fuel is production of liquid drop-in hydrocarbon fuels that can help industries like aviation and ocean shipping to meet their net zero goal. For these industries, electrification is not really an option for mainly technical reason, and hence high density fuels are paramount to meet this the technical requirement. Aether was started about 3 years ago based on tackling this challenge, and we have then kind of evaluated a variety of technology options that were available in the market at different stage of commercialization, and eventually we ended up partnering with GTI Energy here in Chicago, licensing their IP, and then taking over the further commercialization of their underlying technology. Since then, we have raised our Series A funding that was around $40 million global. We brought on board a very strong syndicate of investors, including some strategic investor of the caliber of Chevron, JetBlue, the Eni, and Petronas through their TTV venture capital arm, among others. And now we have built a strong team that is focused in taking the technology to the market and commercializing it. So why we are here today is because we have in front of us a challenge, but also a big opportunity. And the SAF market is driven by policy globally that either incentivize or mandate the use of this fuel for aviation. And the current technology that are used to produce SAF basically converts waste oil in the form of used cooking oil or unedible tallow and make a drop-in fuel. This pathway is called HEFA, and the technology is performing very well and is enable the initial production of SAF, but it has some significant limitation when it comes to the volume of feedstock available. So if you look at the chart on the right side of this slide, the green bars represent the potential capacity, production capacity of SAF using the HEFA used cooking oil pathway, and the blue bar represent the SAF demand. Clearly there is a huge gap going forward, and hence the need to have technology that use feedstock waste carbon streams that go beyond use cooking oil or waste animal fats and greases. So there is a urgent need for a next generation solution to convert abundant feedstock that do not have the same limitation as the HEFA feedstock. So we have in front of us a very big challenge, but at the same time is a very big opportunity. If we look at aviation and ocean shipping all together, by 2050 to achieve a net zero goal, they will need about 1 billion ton of net zero fuel, and that is a very good opportunity to go to the market with technology that can address this challenge. Aether has assembled a very experienced team of both R&D and engineers that have experience not only in the scaling and commercializing technology, but also building commercial plants. And overall, our team has developed, built, and operates syngas-derived project for over $60 billion. In terms of different technology pathways to produce SAF, we have three main pathways. The first one is Fischer-Tropsch. Basically, is a three-step process where syngas is generated from a variety of feedstock. Then the syngas that is CO, so carbon monoxide and hydrogen, is converted into raw hydrocarbons of different carbon chain length, and eventually these raw hydrocarbons are cracked and isomerized so that we can maximize the production of liquid hydrocarbon that meets the jet fuel spec and or the diesel spec. The second pathway is alcohol to jet, so starting from similar feedstock, but going through an alcohol intermediate. The alcohol can be methanol, ethanol, or isobutanol, or in some cases also other heavier alcohols. Then this alcohol is dehydrated, and the olefins are oligomerized, and finally uh, saturated hydrocarbon are produced. And the third pathway is direct hydrogenation. Basically, it's a technology where CO2 is reacted directly with hydrogen and upgraded into hydrocarbon. This technology uses CO2 and hydrogen as the only feedstock, and is focused, let's say, on availability of low cost, cheap hydrogen. So when we look at what Aether has decided in terms of the most cost-effective pathway, we focus on the FT route, and we innovate around this technology pathway, enabling cost-effective production of drop-in liquid hydrocarbon with high feedstock flexibility. The technology is Aether Aurora, and delivers very low capex while maintaining a very high yield, and leveraging a broad range of feedstock, as we will see later, including biogas. The technology itself is based on the Fischer-Tropsch pathway, and our core innovation are in the syngas generation and in the upgrading step, where the raw Fischer-Tropsch reactor effluents are converted into finished fuel, while we partner with existing FT technology provider, given the significant improvement that over the last couple of decades have been introduced to improve economics of the FT step in itself. So when it comes to the syngas generation, we have a novel electrified reactor that we call a triconverter. Basically, is a reactor where we perform conversion of methane and CO2 via dry reforming conversion. We can also convert CO2 and hydrogen via reverse water gas shift, or reconvert light hydrocarbons such as methane via steam methane reforming. So that gives us the ability to use a variety of feedstock, but also to recycle the byproduct, the light ends byproducts from the Fischer-Tropsch step and from the from the upgrading step to maximize the liquid yields. The other key innovation here is that this reactor is electrically heated, so we don't use any of the energy contained in the feedstock to achieve the reactor temperature. We use electricity, and this enables not only to minimize the carbon footprint if clean electricity is used, but it also unable to maximize yield in liquid hydrocarbon that are the valuable products, because virtually all the carbon that comes in with the feedstock ends up in the liquid hydrocarbon product, jet or diesel or naphtha. The second innovation is around the upgrading step, so the step where we take raw hydrocarbons from the FT reactor, and we finish them via cracking and isomerization in a fuel that meet spec for use in jet turbine. The key innovation here is that we have a catalyst that can operate in presence of carbon monoxide that is always present in the Fischer-Tropsch effluent. So that means that the typical separation step between FT and upgrading that is required in conventional technology is not required in our case, and this save both equipment count and OPEX because we don't cool down, drop pressure, and then reheat and recompress to get to the upgrading step. So the combination of these two innovations enable us to achieve virtually ideal yield, so 95+% of the carbon coming in with the feedstock ends up in the liquid hydrocarbon. We dramatically reduce the capex because the tri-converter perform in a single reactor what typically is required in multiple reactor stages, and also the fact that is electrically heated keeps the plant significantly simpler compared to a fire heater configuration, while on the upgrading front we eliminate all the cost and capex associated to CO separation. We do that while maintaining feedstock flexibility because we have a system that can convert light hydrocarbon, CO2, and CO all with the same configuration. In practical term, looking at the feedstock we can process, we have basically we can process virtually any kind of carbon waste stream in a gas form. So we can use CO2 and hydrogen in a typical e-fuel configuration, starting from the bottom of the left corner of this slide. We can use biogas, either as so the combination of CO2 and methane, but we can also react CO2 and methane separately. And another important feature of our technology is that in a typical biogas composition, there is excess of CO2 compared to the hydrogen that is present in the methane component, and we can maximize conversion of all the carbon present in the CO2 with hydrogen addition. And the other two pathways that are not so relevant today discussion is syngas generated from a waste biomass stream via gasification, or industrial off gases coming from, for instance, steel mills or refineries or petrochemical complexes. So the core technology of Aurora with the tri-converter step can take this type of feedstock and convert them in finished hydrocarbon fuels that can go into the aviation logistics in terms of storage, pipeline, and distribution. This slide just give you a little bit more detail of the different pathway that our Aether Aurora technology can leverage, and the most important for this discussion today is the CO2 plus methane, so basically biogas. We can take the raw biogas and after some pre-treatment to remove potential contaminants for the catalyst system, we can convert it into liquid hydrocarbon that meets finished fuel spec. And this slide will be available later, but the key point is that each pathway has its own advantages, but its own requirement. So and typically availability of feedstock at a cost competitive price is important, along with infrastructure that can minimize project cost. A very nice, from our standpoint, a very nice feature of the biogas pathway is that it really help to minimize the upstream investment when it comes to production of liquid hydrocarbon. If you compared, for instance, to a gasification pathway where one has to invest in a gasifier, or in a e-fuel pathway where investment in renewable electricity and hydrogen production can become quite substantial. Leveraging existing biogas infrastructure can be an interesting way to get to the market quickly and with potentially lower capex. So when we look at the trajectory of our technology in terms of pricing point, we plan to get into the market with SAF that is cost competitive with EFA, that historically has been between $2,000 and $3,000 per metric ton. And as the technology mature and we improve and optimize capex and opex, we plan to further reduce the production cost of sustainable fuel. Where we are today, the technologies, as I mentioned, was initially developed by GTI Energy starting in 2016 with funding from the Department of Energy. We have at this point a 1.5 gallon per day pilot plant that has been operating for several years, producing high quality liquid hydrocarbon. And we are now in the process of building a fully integrated demo that has a capacity of around 1 barrel per day. This demo is going again to represent the complete integrated technology, going from tri-converting all the way to upgrading the raw FT effluent into finished hydrocarbon fuel. And the tri-converter portion of the technology has been already demonstrated at this scale earlier this year, including processing CO2 and RNG beside CO2 and green hydrogen. And we plan to have the fully integrated plant operational by end of this year. In terms of commercial activities, we have signed a MOU with JetBlue and with Singapore Airlines. Those MOU are intended to pave the way to sign offtake agreement for future production plant as we deploy the technology. In terms of our pathway to commercialization, as I mentioned, we have been operating a pilot plant for several years. We are in the process of building a fully integrated 1 barrel per day demo plant that will be operational by end of this year. And the tri-converter section has been already demonstrated at this scale. And in parallel, we have advanced discussion with partners to deploy the technology in a small first commercial plant at 50 barrel to 100 barrel per day scale, with the goal to have this unit operational by end of 2028. In parallel, we are evaluating and starting to develop options, projects for the first large commercial plant that will be in the 1,000 barrel per day scale range, and we are evaluating option and projects basically globally, deciding on where we can deploy the technology more cost effectively. So those are the key highlights for the commercialization path. We rapidly scaling the technology, and we are looking for opportunity to deploy it at commercial scale. So with this, I concluded my talk, and I'm available for question. The slide has my contact details, and please feel free to reach out if you have any question or you are interested in discussing with ETA. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Great presentation. You guys are making some great progress. So high level, there's a couple of ways to get to SAF, it sounds like. You've got the HEFA path, and now we're talking about a biogas path. So HEFA, you've got these large fatty molecules that you're making into aviation fuel, but in the biogas space, we got little tiny methane molecules that you're building the size of them through things like Fischer-Tropsch from there. And so a lot of new terms for us biogas people, like reverse water gas shift, SMR,
Yep.
Fischer-Tropsch. One thing I wanted to offer up to people, if this conversation is interesting to you, I'm going to try to channel some of this enthusiasm going forward. I'm starting a group. We're going to have our first call on June 10th, calling it Biogas 2X, so any number of fuels, nicknaming it BGX. Shoot me an email, paul@green-tech.com, or find me on LinkedIn if this would be of interest to you. We're putting a steering committee together now. So Claudio, we'll let you go. Thank you. And so
Thank you.
with that, next up is Surya Godura. Surya has over 24 years of international experience across power generation, clean tech, and engineering and construction sectors. As head of strategy and business development at Envolon, he drives all aspects of commercialization of modular technologies that can transform biogenic and industrial waste gases, liquid green fuels, and chemicals. Surya has a degree in chemical engineering. He brings a hands-on leadership style, a deep understanding of energy markets, and proven track record in product management, market development, business development, and construction project management. He's also a mentor at the Clean Tech Open. So Surya, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know when you see the presentation.
Presentation is there. Yes, you're all set.
Great, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'm very excited to share some of the work that we are doing here at Envolon to enable the availability of alternative fuels for some of the hard-to-abate sectors. And as everyone else on this panel is going to speak, and as Claudio mentioned before, the whole idea is basically to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors, whether that be shipping, aviation, or chemicals production. So to be able to do that, you need to provide them with high energy density fuel that's easy to transport and also cost competitive. Obviously, you can't have alternative fuels that are 4 or 5x the cost of fossil fuels today and assume that an accelerated decarbonization will happen. That's just not going to happen. So our whole idea was to do something that is very cost effective and palatable to the consumers. So that's on the one side of it, trying to solve the hard-to-abate sectors decarbonization. The other piece is utilizing what's available to us in form of waste gas, and primarily waste methane, whether that be from landfills, dairy digesters, biomass, wastewater treatment plants, or for that matter, oil and gas flaring. So you have these two sides of the equation. One is where you have waste energy available, and the other place where you need energy that's cost effective. So how do you take one to make the other? And that's where technologies like ours come in. If you can make decentralized, modular, scalable platforms that could be deployed where the waste gas is available or the waste feedstock is available, rather than moving the waste feedstock to a central location and then building a mega scale plant to build alternative fuels or alternative chemicals. The former, we believe, is the right way to go, so that you're not transporting low energy density feedstock and paying a significant price for it. You would much rather transport high energy density product in a liquid form to where it's required. And with that idea, Envolon was founded. The research for Envolon was being done at MIT for about 7 to 10 years now. Both the co-founders are from MIT, and where they basically designed a platform technology that could take waste gases such as methane and carbon dioxide and convert that into liquid green fuels, primarily liquid methanol. That's sort of our first generation product, where we would be converting waste methane in form of biogas, for example, or oil and gas flare or other industrial flares, plastics pyrolysis off gas, for example, converting that into green methanol using a platform technology that fits into a 40 to 50 foot container size. And I'll describe a bit more later in this discussion how that process works, etc. But the whole idea was to build it in a compact manner with a compact footprint, so that you can just drive this to where a landfill is, where a dairy digester is, or a wastewater treatment plant is. And if need be, stack multiple of these next to each other, get to the scale you require. So the first generation product is essentially methane to methanol. The second generation product, or a future iteration of this product, could be using the same platform technology with slightly different physics to make green ammonia. We have done quite a bit of research work here using ARPA-E funding that was available to us last year to develop the second generation technology that could potentially make green ammonia as well. But obviously, that's not ready for prime time yet. That will probably be a few years down the line. Our primary aim is to get to green methanol as soon as we can, so that we can start deploying some of these modules and then focus on the next generation system. So the whole idea here is to deliver the system on site where the waste is available, make it a modular technology that can be fabricated off-site entirely, and then installation and commissioning is as little time as possible, and obviously something that's capital efficient and scalable from the get-go. So why did we do this, and how are we different from a stick-build alternative fuels mega-sized plant? So for a big alternative fuels plant, to make economic sense, obviously you would need to make it at a bigger scale, and the payback period for that sometimes is more than a decade. In fact, a lot more. So you need economies of scale to get to that point where you get your break even and it starts making sense. So for us, instead of economies of scale, we kind of take a different look. We look at economies of mass production and leveraging that to make a cost-effective and viable technology like ours. So how do we do that? So we essentially use internal combustion engines or reciprocating engines, spark-ignited reciprocating engines, as chemical reformers and reactors. So thereby, using an internal combustion engine, you can replace a heat exchanger, a compressor, and a reformer or reactor. So you make it very cost-effective. You're using a commodity like like an internal combustion engine to replace premium products like reactors, heat exchangers, compressors, etc. So by doing this, as part of our process, we not only reduce the footprint, we reduce the cost significantly, and then you can start building these at scale, churning out tens of these at manufacturing plants, wherever that may be. So that was the whole idea, to move away from economies of scale and focus on something that could be leveraged to drive economies of mass production. And once you are able to do that and you start using off-the-shelf equipment, then your deployment time, your maintenance, and the construction in general becomes a lot faster, a lot easier as well. So compared to a stick-built chemical plant, a system like ours takes in about 300 MMBTUs of waste methane, or 300,000 scuff per day of waste methane to make 8 tons of methanol product. In metric terms, you're talking about 8,500 meter cube per day of waste methane to make 8 tons of methanol per day. And the payback period, depending on whether it's landfill or dairy digester, it could be anywhere from 3 to up to 4 years. So moving on. So how would this look at, let's say, a landfill site? Before I go into the details of process, at a landfill site, if you imagine a landfill here, as is shown on the screen on the left-hand side, once the biogas comes out of landfill, you would need to do some level of pretreatment, as in remove sulfur, siloxanes, get gas to a quality where a gas can go into a gas engine, let's say for power production, right? Sulfur, siloxanes, VOCs, dewatering, all of that needs to happen. And then depending on how much carbon dioxide is in the system or is in the feed gas, we may have to do some upgrading. But definitely, we don't need gas at the same quality as RNG. In fact, we would love some CO2 be in the system because it helps the second part of the process that produces methanol. And I'll describe that in a minute. If there is nitrogen in the system, we don't need to remove nitrogen because that's an inert for us. So it just passes through the system. It doesn't participate in the reaction. Obviously, given a specific amount of flow rate, the more the nitrogen, the less the yield, but there is definitely capex savings for not having to upgrade to remove nitrogen while taking a bit of a hit on the yield. It still would make a lot of economic sense for us to work with a gas that has both nitrogen as well as carbon dioxide, instead of going to RNG, where then you have to pay a premium price for RNG and using it as a feedstock, then the economics would be very different, obviously. So once you have the cleaner gas, then deploying as many systems as required. Let's say if it's a landfill that has about 2.5 million cubic feet per day of biogas with 50% methane, then you're talking about post upgrading about 1.2 to 5 million cubic feet. That essentially would mean at 300,000 cubic feet per day, 4 modules of ours. So you deploy the 4 modules. And then as the methanol is produced, you collect that methanol in a temporary storage. Now, the temporary storage could be an ISO tanker, or it could be a fixed tank as well, depending on the scale of methanol that's being produced. But the whole idea is basically to collect the methanol as it's produced at site. And if it's ISO tanker, as soon as the ISO tanker is filled up, just move it off site. If you think about a landfill, trucks come in and go out all the time. So another couple of ISO tankers moving in and out of the facility is definitely very manageable. And the logistics of moving methanol are proven as well. And I'll talk about how we get to scale, because this is a decentralized system. One question that may be obvious to you is, hey, how do you get to a scale where you can attract a shipper or a methanol to jet fuel potential user? So I'll explain that in a bit later in the slides. So once you have the methanol that's produced, we would start moving it at offsite. Going a bit into the process itself. So I briefly talked about the use of internal combustion engines. So I'll talk in a bit more detail of how exactly we are doing it. So we take in waste gas, let's say if it's from a landfill flare. So here is an example of a landfill flare. So we take waste gas from there. It might have some nitrogen, it might have some CO2, that's fine with us. And we do some pretreatment if at all required. And pretreatment here is removal of sulfur, siloxanes, VOCs, perhaps dewatering as well. And then from there, it goes into an internal combustion engine genset. So it's essentially a genset that is being run very, very fuel rich. So typically, if you are producing power, to maximize power production, you might want to run the asset in a very stoichiometric ratio so that you have complete combustion and power production in a reliable manner to the maximum extent possible. However, our objective is not to produce power. Our objective is to manage the reaction in such a way that the exhaust doesn't have carbon dioxide and water vapor, but the exhaust has carbon monoxide and hydrogen. That's the objective for us. So to be able to get to that, if you run the reaction in a very fuel-rich manner, as in have lots of natural gas or methane in the feed and a lot less air, then what you're doing is not full combustion, but partial combustion because you don't have enough oxygen to combust. So your carbon dioxide your carbon doesn't convert to carbon dioxide. It stays as carbon monoxide, and your hydrogen from methane stays as hydrogen, doesn't become water vapor. So the whole IP for us and a lot of research that was done was around this. Making this this has been tried for a long time, but making this stable, making this reliable, and because we are running fuel rich, making sure no soot is made to clog up the engines is the most challenging part of all of this. So that's where we have developed this IP around being able to run this gas engine genset in a manner where you can run it stably and produce syngas of a quality that is very, very close to the ideal 2:1 ratio of hydrogen and carbon monoxide. And obviously, since this is a partial oxidation reaction, you do produce some power. And the power that we produce is good enough for us to self-power the whole system, both the first part of the process, if there is any power requirement, and definitely the downstream process that I'll explain now. So we do not require any external utilities, whether that be power, whether that be water. So if you're thinking about converting landfill gas into methanol, we can stay very, very close to the carbon footprint of the landfill gas or or the carbon intensity of the landfill gas without adding to that, because we are mostly self-powered. Not mostly, we are definitely self-powered. So moving from there, once you produce syngas, then you do some conditioning, then you do some compression. So here you would need a compressor. And then the final step of the process is to make methanol in presence of a commercial quality catalyst, whether that be from Johnson Matthey or Clariant. This is proven system. The first part of the system, producing syngas from methane, is what is the innovation. The second part of the system is a commercial system that we are utilizing with a commercial quality catalyst. But the whole idea was not just to produce syngas and leave others to figure out what to do with it, but to provide an entire solution. So we embarked on making the simplest molecule possible once you have syngas, and that would be methanol. And methanol, by the way, has a market that is about 40 billion annually, about 100 million tons annually. So it has a significant market demand in the chemical sector, pharmaceutical sector as feedstock, etc. And that would be the mature sectors. But I think now we have shipping and aviation also that could use methanol as direct fuel or feedstock to make sustainable aviation fuel. So this is what we are doing. So this is where the internal combustion engine goes, and then everything else is off-the-shelf equipment. However, so this is the first generation of the technology that we are going to release. We have completed the pilot now. I'll just talk about that in a bit. And we'll have our first commercial unit early next year. In the subsequent generation of the product, we are also looking to do away with the syngas compressor that you saw on the previous slide and the methanol synthesis reactor that you saw on the previous slide. And we are going to replace that as well with another internal combustion engine. We have done a lot of work here at our development center in Woburn, Massachusetts, where we have tested this system with deploying the catalyst in the cylinder. Obviously, the picture that you see is the first iteration of it. The next iteration of it is very different. But the whole idea here is to deploy the catalyst in the gas engine in the cylinder such that you have the reaction of converting syngas into methanol in cylinder. Once you're able to do that, then you produce methanol at the back end of this system, and then you collect. So now we have not only replaced a heat exchanger, a compressor, a reformer here to make syngas from a gas engine. In the second part of the process, we are also going to replace another large syngas compressor and a methanol reactor with another commoditized engine. So the second generation of the technology, which would be available in about 2+ years, would then have one gas engine as a reformer, one gas engine as a reactor, and both together producing methane to the methanol, both together producing methane to methanol. So moving on very quickly, talking about the market size, and many of you who are from the biogas industry, you do understand the potential of biogas and how large this market is. Here is a US perspective, but I won't belabor the point. All I need to say here is there is significant amount of biogas that is still available, despite a lot of biogas to RNG or biogas to power projects, because there are a lot of landfills that are either smaller than where the RNG economics would work, or that are far away from any viable gas or electrical network. So all of those are still flaring the biogas that's produced. Dairy farms, for example, dairy digesters in many cases are much smaller than what the RNG economics would require. In many cases, what we have seen is now RNG projects are having to pool feedstock or animal waste from multiple different farms, right? And that's the exact thing that we want to avoid. Why would you want to ferry low energy density feedstock and pay for it? So instead of doing that, deploying one methane to methanol system at each of these farms, so that you target the small farms, produce methanol where the waste is available. So from that perspective, there is significant amount of waste gas available. In fact, the amount of waste gas that's available in the US today that's still untapped can enable us to produce up to 18 million tons per year of methanol if they were all to have an Embolon module. And at 18 million tons, and with a methanol demand of 100 million tons today and evolving to about 130+ million tons in the next 5 to 7 years, that is a significant portion of the green methanol demand in the future that could be met from just biogas in the US. And now if you think about biogas in Europe, in Asia, in South America, obviously there is significant potential there. And that's our objective, exactly as to produce methanol where the waste is. So build these regional hubs so that you can create an ecosystem where you are using local gas, you are producing methanol locally, and you are doing a hub and spoke model where you can get to scale very quickly to get off-takers interested. And that's exactly what this slide shows here. Here is an example of a use case. Let's say you're looking at the Houston Ship Channel, and within about 200 to 250 miles of Houston Ship Channel, you have about 7 different landfill sites that have enough waste gas available for us to produce anywhere from 10,000 tons to 25,000 tons per year of methanol from each of these sites. So very soon, we would get to about 100,000 tons just from these 7 sites. So the whole idea being, even though the platform that we have built is decentralized, you can get to scale very, very quickly just from a handful of sites without having to spread ourselves thin and ferry methanol from 1,000 miles away. And especially given that the logistics of moving liquid products has been very well established, proven, and it's very cost effective, especially if you move methanol by rail or by barges. The cost is very, very low. And then even if it's trucks within a 100-mile radius, even that is very economical to move. So that's our whole idea, to build these hubs across US and in other regions with our partners, and our partners being biogas project developers on the one side, scalable methanol off-takers on the other side, and us building these hub and spoke models in different regions and getting to scale and building these methanol hubs as required. Transportation costs, as you might have a question as to, all this sounds good, but does it actually make sense to build this hub and spoke model and move methanol from so many different places? So here is an example of a transportation cost, right? So within 50 miles, where you use trucks, which tend to be more expensive than railroad or barges, the cost of production, the transportation cost as a fraction of the cost of production is just 10%. And that means if you go 100 miles or 200 miles, and then you can start using railroads, or if you are next to a river system, potentially using barges, then this stays very, very close to 10%, or even, or it may even fall below 10%, because now you are using a more cost-effective mode of railroad or barges. So the bottom line being, it makes a lot more sense to move the energy dense product, which is a liquid and can be stored under ambient condition, versus a low energy density feedstock to these distances. This is my second last slide, very quickly, talking about how we stack up. And the whole idea here is not necessarily to do a commercial sort of pitch, but just to give you an idea of how decentralized modular systems like ours can really bring down the cost of production if done in a smart way. So here is an example where we have some data from S&P Bunker Wire on 100% carbon accounted methanol, which was trading at about $1,070 per ton back, I think, in January, February timeframe this year at the Houston hub. And if you look at fossil methanol production, which is a very, very mature sector, compared to that, if you look at typical biomethanol, whether that mostly from biomass gasification, or e-methanol, whether that's carbon capture plus hydrogen to make methanol, both of those are significantly more expensive than fossil methanol. And in fact, e-methanol is probably more expensive than what the carbon neutral methanol is trading for today. So the idea here is using an embalon system, whether that be industrial flaring, oil and gas flaring use case, or landfill, which requires some level of pretreatment to remove sulfur siloxanes, or using dairy digesters, where you might have to do a bit of upgrading to remove some CO2. All these three use cases are still significantly cost effective than a large-scale biomethanol plant from biomass gasification or e-methanol systems. And then lastly, very quickly, our commercial journey and what we have done so far. So the company was founded in 2021. And from then on, we have gone to build this facility here in Woburn, and where we have done a lot of development work. We are just finishing a field demonstration at a landfill site with Montauk Renewables outside Houston. It's a very successful field demo. And then from there, we would be moving on to building a first commercial scale unit, which would take in 300 MMBTUs per day, or 3000 MCFD per day, or 8,500 meter cube per day of methane to make 8 tons of methanol. That would be deployed next year. And then thereon, 2027, we will have a few more deployments under the first project. And 2028 onwards is when we start, late 2027, early 2028 onwards is when we start scaling significantly to get to a scale that would start interesting some of the big off-takers, whether that be shippers or methanol to jet fuel producers. So if we are talking to investors, we are going to raise our Series A pretty soon. So we are very happy to talk to investors, potential partners, and methanol off-takers if you're interested. That's me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Paul.
Good, Surya. Thank you for that. So a couple of questions came in. I'll lob out there. Roughly what kind of price would you say you had in your economics for your methanol for what the biogas or landfill gas was worth?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the final price would depend on how the contract is structured, I guess, whether the biogas provider wants to participate in the project. But it could range anywhere from as low as $1.50 to probably $10 per MMBTU, I guess. And at the lower end, it would mean we are just buying gas at a specific price and then doing most of the cleanup ourselves. And at the higher end, it would mean that some cleanup would already be done by the biogas provider,
Okay.
and then we take it from there.
Another question, how much methanol is produced from a kilogram of biomethane?
So the 300,000 cubic feet per day is essentially about 10 tons, 6 tons per day. So 6 tons of methane produces 8 tons of methanol. So on a kilogram basis, you can work it out from there. So maybe 6 kilograms produces 8 kilograms.
Another question for you. The user asks, I can see the point of moving away from economies of scale to mass production, at least for small volume. However, how about operating costs and maintenance? Are you not afraid that this will impact the business case?
Yeah, so see how the system is, right? You have one gas engine genset to start with. In the second generation, you'll have a second gas engine genset to start with. Other than that, you're talking about knockout drums. Probably the most cost expensive piece here is going to be the same gas compressor. Now, in the second generation, that would also be replaced with another engine. So the point being, there are very few moving parts, right? Our engines and compressors, they're very, very standard maintenance intervals, very well-known maintenance practices. So we are very confident that on the OPEX side, obviously, we won't be able to meet the mature OPEX of a stick-built large-scale plant. We might be slightly more expensive, but given that we are using some of these very mature commodities to build our technology, we would not be very far from what you would see as typically OPEX for a large-scale plant.
Last question, what kind of engine electric efficiency for this process, though power generation is not the primary pathway?
Yeah, so for us, it needs to be stationary internal combustion engines, spark ignited. But other than that, whether it's a rich burn engine or a lean burn engine, it doesn't matter to us because we are going to run the engine in a very different mode and our control algorithms are our proprietary. So we would be doing a lot of that work. We won't be doing any modification to the body of the engine. It's just all control split. So I think as long as it's a spark ignited internal combustion engine, that's all we care about. Obviously, a reliable body.
Yeah. And then I'll lob one question out there that's kind of hot and late breaking is last night there were some clarifications to the tax credits deployed out there from Ways and Means committees, things like Section 45Z extended through 2031. As time goes here, if any of the presenters have any comments on how some of these tax credit changes affects their business case, let us know. But good, Surya. Thank you very much for your pitch there for Envolon. Very compelling. So we'll let you go. Thank you. And our last speaker today we've got is Dr. Stephen Beaton. Dr. Beaton did his undergrad and PhD in chemistry, focusing on hydrogen catalysis. He spent 7 years as a fuel scientist in the U.S. Air Force with assignments spanning the Air Force Research Lab, the Air Force Petroleum Office, and the Pentagon. At the Pentagon, Dr. Beaton helped start up the U.S. Air Force's Sustainable Aviation Fuels program. After the U.S. Air Force, Dr. Beaton attended the Stanford Graduate School of Business for his MBA before starting Circularity Fuels. So with that, Dr. Beaton, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks for hosting this event today. It'll be a tough act to follow after those two great presentations, but happy to chat through what Circularity Fuels is building, and hopefully answer some of those questions about 45Z, how the subsidies and incentives interact with liquid fuels as a product. As Paul said, I founded a company. We're now 10 people strong, and the name of the company is Circularity Fuels. Our goal is to make fuels that are compatible with existing infrastructure, but that don't rely on fossil sources. We're very focused on building proprietary reactors that convert biogas into renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. But how do we get here? As Paul said, I spent 7 years in the US Air Force as a fuel scientist. This is when I was deployed in charge of the Air Force Petroleum Office's deployed lab, doing quality control of all the jet fuel that the Air Force burns in the Middle East. When I was at the Pentagon, I stood up the Air Force's program on sustainable aviation fuel, which led to the first ever flight of a jet engine on captured carbon. And that's really when I had the insight that biogas can play a meaningful role in contributing to affordable and available liquid fuels, which is why I started Circularity Fuels. Since then, we've created a great team, a lot of technical experts who work behind the scenes. I'll point out that our head of business development is Terry Baggett. He's the one who most of you, if you have questions, if you're a biogas developer or in the SAF space, will interact with. He goes to a lot of the conferences and leads our marketing efforts. And we have a great consortium of investors, from investors like DCVC and MCJ, as well as the fact that we've received grants from some of the leading grant-giving organizations in the country, like the National Science Foundation and ARPA-E, which is the energy version of DARPA, which invented the internet, and other world-changing inventions. Ultimately, what we see is a soaring demand for renewable liquids, right? There are kind of two drivers of demand for these renewable liquids. The first in maritime is a recent UN International Maritime Organization regulation that charges shippers up to $380 per ton for CO2 emissions from their ships, right? If you compare that to LCFS credits, which this audience is likely more familiar with, you can see why shippers and maritime companies are looking to get off of fossil fuels, right? So LCFS prices carbon at roughly $60 to $70 a ton, right? This is a really large penalty and is meant to drive the adoption of renewable fuels. Similarly, for aviation, there's a lot of regulations coming in Europe and the UK that have mandated that airlines buy sustainable aviation fuel. And currently, a lot of industry experts predict that the demand will outstrip supply for those fuels. So, that's why we're seeing a huge demand for renewable liquid fuels. And we think that biogas can be a key feedstock to make these liquid fuels a reality. So for those of you who are new to this space, we get a lot of questions. Why choose liquid fuels over renewable natural gas? And we give three primary reasons. And people who are industry veterans will likely know this better than I do. But the first is that in order to get 45Z tax credits, LCFS tax credits, you have to use that natural gas as a transportation fuel, which generally means road or air transportation. And there are only so many buses and trucks that run on compressed natural gas, which means that the market is becoming increasingly saturated. People don't get the same premiums for RNG that they used to, and so they're looking for other applications of biogas where they can still get a lot of those fuel credits that they're used to. The second is that liquid fuels, are easily transportable, whereas a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of RNG upgrading has already been taken. The farms and our biogas sources near pipelines have already shown that they can create RNG in a commercially viable way and are already exporting RNG to the pipelines. Whereas farms that might be even 3 or 4 miles away from the pipelines don't have those same economics. And liquid fuels, as the previous speaker pointed out, are much more easily transported in over the road on trains, and you don't require close access to pipelines. Finally, natural gas, particularly in the US, is incredibly cheap. Liquid fuels typically are 3 to 5 times more valuable than natural gas, which means you're selling a product that is more valuable and you rely less on incentives and subsidies. So we know that RNG is not the only option, though, right? There are really two options currently when we talk about what are the traditional ways to create value from biogas. Paul asked that I make this presentation educational, and as a PhD chemist, that means formulas, so please bear with me, but I'll try to keep it light, right? So on the left side, you see that renewable natural gas, like we've talked about, most of you are likely familiar with it. It takes biogas, which for this presentation, let's just say it's 1 part CO2, 3 parts methane. It separates out that CO2 and it injects methane into the pipeline. If you look at the value created, you get a little money from natural gas, but you get the vast majority of your value from LCFS and EPA RINs. If you don't have a pipeline close or you choose not to make RNG, you can create power, right? So you take that same biogas mixture on the right, you add air to that, you combust that biogas mixture, and then you sell that energy. What we're seeing from the market is biogas suppliers can get roughly $10 per 1,000 cubic foot, roughly half of that coming from the energy and half of that coming from the renewable energy credits or RECs. Those RECs have fallen in value over the past 10, 15 years as solar and wind have become more widespread. And so we're seeing that for a lot of farmers, that leaves very few options that are actually commercially viable, right? So if you look at traditional dairy farms, right, which is our first focused market. If you're a small farm, oftentimes it doesn't make sense to either make power or upgrade to RNG. For a medium farm, that's when I say isolated, I mean you're more than 3 to 4 miles from your next closest dairy farm, right? The practice of the previous speaker mentioned of pooling together biogas or pooling together manure is something that you can do if you have farms that are close. But if you're an isolated farm, again, it typically doesn't make sense to pay for the capex of RNG upgrading. And then power can be very dependent on which grid you're on. We can talk a little bit about that later, but essentially, if you're in California or in the West, there are a lot of incentives for power from biogas, but that's not the case in the center of the country, in Texas and Ohio and Michigan. So there aren't a lot of good options. Really, kind of the only great option is making RNG when you have multiple close farms that exist, particularly in places like the Central Valley of California, because the case for pooling the biogas, pooling the manure to invest in a large RNG upgrading plant really makes sense. But as you can see, a lot of farmers, a lot of biogas sources are left out with the current options, which is why we are taking that biogas and turning them into liquid fuels. How? It's not too dissimilar from the talks you've heard. It's generally a two-step process. You first convert biogas into synthesis gas. Synthesis gas is just a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. Typically, the ideal ratio is 2 to 1, meaning 2 molecules of hydrogen for every 1 molecule of carbon monoxide. That mixture is called synthesis gas because it's easy to make things like methanol and liquid fuels from that synthesis gas. And we do that by taking the biogas and converting the biogas into syngas via a combination of dry reforming of methane and steam reforming of methane. You'll learn what those are a little bit more at towards the end of the presentation. But once the synthesis gas is made, we then turn that syngas into jet fuel via Fischer-Tropsch. And that is a Fischer-Tropsch reactor that we have built. We've licensed a proprietary catalyst that we then use to make a liquid fuel and ideally target that hydrocarbon range that is used for jet fuel and diesel in a very selective manner. So what does that look like in terms of biogas to SAF, right? If you look at the credit landscape as well as the customer offtake landscape, you can get up to $80 per 1,000 cubic foot of biogas. And that's divided between customer offtake. Because you're using that as a transportation fuel, you still get similar LCFS and EPA RINs, as well as the 45Z credit incentive. As Paul mentioned, that's been extended to 2031, and there was language inserted in the most recent House bill that allows dairy manure or other manure to be used as a feedstock for that 45Z tax credit, right? And I'll say one of the important parts of the 45Z tax credit is that there is no minimum, right? So they give you $1.50 per gallon of SAF if you achieve a certain emissions reduction. But the more negative in emissions you are, the more money you can get from that 45Z credit. And again, one of the great appeals of biogas is because you are preventing the emissions of methane that would have otherwise been vented from the manure, you can have a deeply carbon negative fuel. The final two credits and incentives that exist, I'll point out, is because we're using some of that CO2 component in the biogas, you can get 45Q credits as well as 45V credits, which typically come from production of hydrogen. Because we go through a syngas intermediate on the way to a liquid product, the process is eligible for 45V credits, depending on particulars of the case. Then we can talk more offline if anybody has questions about that. So we see that as a very strong value proposition for biogas, which is why we are taking that biogas to a liquid fuel. And what does that mean once you unlock all those customer, both the value for the customer and incentives, right? Even for small farms, we think on a case-by-case basis, depending on the geography and power price near the farm, it could make sense to upgrade to SAF. But really where we're focused is on the farms that are medium isolated farms. So dairy farms that have between 1,500 and 7,500 cows that are producing or could produce somewhere between 100 and 500 skiffums of biogas. Those are really our sweet spot because there really aren't other alternatives to valorize that biogas. And we think converting to SAF is the best way to turn that biogas into value. We think we're also more appealing for large installations where you can pool biogas or you can pool manure, but we think there's already, RNG is already a proven player in that space, and it may take longer for us to displace the current option of upgrading biogas to RNG in those settings. So you've heard from a lot of people talk about synthesis gas, different ways to get there. I thought I would dive a little more into what are the primary ways to get to synthesis gas from biogas, right? So the first one is steam methane reformation, in which you only convert that methane component, right? So you add equal parts water and methane to generate syngas, and you kind of ignore the CO2 component. There are really three downsides for that. One, you need external heat. Two, the syngas ratio, right? We talked about how 2 to 1 is ideal. 3 to 1 is less ideal, particularly for Fischer-Tropsch. So you've got to go and you've got to modify that ratio using one of a couple of methods. And then finally, it requires the most water of all of these options. So that's steam methane reformation. Obviously, the pro is, steam methane reformation is the most common way that we get hydrogen in the world to make things like ammonia, chemicals, petrochemicals. Steam methane reformation is an incredibly well understood reactor with incredibly well understood catalysts. The second way that you can make syngas from biogas is partial oxidation, right? You heard that from the previous speaker. What's great there is you don't need an external heat source, you don't need water, and you can make syngas in the ideal ratio. I think the previous speaker highlighted it. Historically, the partial oxidation reactors have been incredibly unstable, would only last for hundreds of hours rather than the thousands or tens of thousands of hours that you need for a commercial plant. And Invalon have done an incredible job at proving that their reactors can go the distance and perform stably over long periods of time. Finally, the approach that we're taking is what's known as bioreforming, right? So we take that CO2 component, we combine CO2 with methane to make syngas. That's known as dry reforming. And for the methane that is left over, we add water in the form of steam to do steam reforming. So we are doing both steam and dry reforming of methane to create a syngas ratio. The upsides of that is it creates a syngas ratio that is in the ideal ratio. And we're using that CO2 portion, right? To qualify for those 45Q credits, you need to use the CO2 portion. And ultimately, by using that CO2 portion, you get more syngas per unit of biogas than the other methods, which is why we've decided to take that approach. In all transparency, dry reforming reactors, just like partial oxidation reactors, have been very unstable historically, and really where a lot of our work has been going into how do you make a reactor, make a catalyst bed that can sustain that reaction stably over tens of thousands of hours. And the approach that we've taken is somewhat similar in that we've been inspired by automotive components. Those components are the catalytic converters, right? So a catalytic converter exists on almost every internal combustion engine car, and it's really just a very compact chemical reactor, right? It has thousands of channels where traditionally the heat from the exhaust of a internal combustion engine is used to convert the emissions of that exhaust into less harmful emissions. We use a similar approach. I'd say what makes us stand out is that we change out the catalyst, so we'll do bioreforming of biogas, and we electrify the entire catalytic converter. So we run a current, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, those are the channels. We run a current through the entire channel, which creates very even heating across the entirety of the catalytic converter. I'll say two things that stand out about this reactor is one, it allows us to perform bioreforming stably across tens of thousands of hours. We've demonstrated the bioreforming reaction at a lab scale, and we're just now scaling up to the reactor that you see on your screen. And the second thing is we're using catalytic converter technology that has been scaled to tens of millions of pieces per year, which means we are very confident we can deploy dozens of these plants per year without having to invent novel manufacturing techniques or stress the supply chains for these reactors, right? It's a similar mindset of how do you leverage kind of cheap, well-known reactors and for performing these distributed reactions. And then from there, we go to Fischer-Tropsch. This is our gallon per day stand that we have currently in our lab that is running Fischer-Tropsch. And again, that Fischer-Tropsch process takes the syngas and essentially puts all of those carbon monoxides together with the hydrogens to make a mid-distillate or jet fuel or diesel-like product that we can then refine into the final fuel product that is used by the end consumers. What this actually looks like in practice, I said, initially we're very focused on dairy and swine biogas. So that's an artistic rendition of what one of our plants would look like. It'd be a containerized reactor assembled offsite that would take 250 SCFM or standard cubic feet per minute of biogas. Again, for farms with roughly 2,000 to 3,000 cows and would generate between $5 and $10 million a year. The idea is that our first deployment of this plant will be next year at a dairy farm in Northern California that we are continuing to identify. We've already run our reformer on biogas that we've bought from a dairy farm in Central California, and we continue to refine our ability to actually convert real biogas, right? I'd say that's one of the things that makes us stand out is that from day one, we've been very focused on how do we actually get the real biogas, understand what the composition is, how can we actually convert it into a liquid fuel. Again, the idea is that we will scale up modularly. So for farms with, say, 5,000 cows or 6,000 cows, they would just simply have 2 containers, right? And the first deployment will be sometime in 2026, like I said. From there, we plan to scale up to larger sources of biogas. We see wastewater treatment plants as the next scale up for us. And for those, we're targeting plants that can produce roughly 8,000 SCFM of biogas. So typically wastewater treatment plants that are treating roughly 20 million gallons per day will be the size of wastewater treatment plant that we're targeting, right? There are differences in terms of the carbon intensity from those 2 biogas sources, which impacts the incentive subsidies and value of the fuel that you generate. But you can see that each plant is generating a meaningful amount of revenue, and we plan to deploy those sometime in 2029. With that, for those who have questions or want to learn more or want to understand how to partner with us, please reach out to the head of business development, Terry. His email is here. We'd love to chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. Great material, great overview. So there you have it. 3 very accomplished speakers, exciting kind of early stage commercial, right? We're very early stages here. So we're out of the lab and now we're starting to get commercial for the next couple, 3 years. So these presentations are on my website right now, green-tech.com/events. These videos will be out in about a week. So you'll have an email in your box kind of giving you these links. Hit me up if again you're interested in this idea of biogas 2X going forward as a conversation. If some of this kind of strikes your fancy, we're going to try to continue this conversation. And one final last plug for our sponsor today. Again, Plan-ET Biogas. Anytime you're looking for a digester for your project to make the biogas, to feed these biogas to X opportunities, give Plan-ET Biogas a call at planet-biogas.com. So we do have a couple of seconds for some more questions, and there's been 100 of you that have stayed this whole time. And so maybe I'll just take advantage of some of this time for the speakers. Take a swing at this. What policy blockers are out there that stand in the way of further adoption of these new fuels that you're creating? Any speaker want to just take a swing at policy blockers that are standing in the way of wild success?
I'll take a swing. I'd love to hear from other speakers, but I think one of the challenges, I'd say particularly for those focused on maritime fuels, is that maritime fuels don't typically have the same coverage of transportation fuels as defined by EPA RINs or LCFS, which means that a lot of the same incentives and subsidies that exist for airlines and trucking fuels don't exist for maritime fuels. And so, as we continue to sort out how best to get these fuels to market, I think trying to at least standardize across forms of transportation would be helpful.
Anybody else?
So maybe from my standpoint, the uncertainty related to 45Z was in terms of duration and underlying rules to calculate the value of the incentives were creating some uncertainty for liquid fuel for transportation. So the fact that we are going to have more clarity on that will definitely help projects going forward. But in general, I agree with Stephen having more harmonized set of incentives across different application and even different geography can help to have a level playing field. So.
What about any technical obstacles? What are really the technical areas that we need to de-risk as an industry to really get to full-scale deployment? Anything that you would say are kind of the technical spots of focus where if I'm a buyer and I'm a little nervous about deploying something so new, right? Nobody wants to be the first adopter. Everybody wants to be the second or third adopter. What technologies do we really need to work on to further de-risk?
And I can probably talk about it a bit from a slightly different angle. I think it's not as much a technology challenge. I understand the fact that some of the technologies are new and novel, and you would definitely need alpha and beta customers to adopt before widespread. But I think there's a bit of a general business mindset challenge as well, especially when it comes to methanol. So most of the time, the shipping industry is used to buying fuel at spot markets, right? Long-term contracts are unheard of. So, but for alternative fuel adoption, you would need to start working on that. If you have long-term contracts, then projects have bankability. If your projects on bankability, then technologies scale up. So that's sort of the chicken and egg situation where I think if there is a way to get this demand and supply sort of aligned through some long-term contracts, that would definitely bridge some of the technology scale-up challenges.
Very good. Okay, well, so many new terms and new ways to look at deploying the simple CH4 biogas molecule. We used to waste CO2 and now it's a feedstock for these new reactors. So it's kind of a whole new way of looking at the biogas industry. So thank you again, presenters. We're going to wrap it right here. Again, the slides are on my website. Another week for the videos to come out. So thanks again, Saria, Claudio, Stephen. Be well. Good to see you. And everyone else, enjoy the day.